Hi, everyone, and welcome to the GFPD webinar, Clinical Trial Participation and Needs, What We Learned from the EL-PFDD Meeting, Part 3. We are honored that you are joining us this evening. I am Katie Sacra, Director of Family Programs here at the Global Foundation for Peroxisomal Disorders, and I'm going to be your host for tonight's webinar. We're joined tonight by our presenters, Sarah Liz and Dr. Mousumi Bose, two of many who have been instrumental in collecting and analyzing critical data on peroxisomal disorders and preparing the now available Voice of the Patient report. Sarah Liz is a recent graduate from Montclair State University with her degree in nutrition and food science. Currently, she works as a nutritionist at Women, Infants, Children, where she provides nutrition counseling, assesses dietary risk factors, and manages special formula approvals for children with medical conditions. In the past year, she has completed research on gastrointestinal and feeding symptoms, treatments, and clinical trial needs in patients with peroxisomal disorders. These experiences have strengthened her ability to provide evidence-based nutrition care, conduct meaningful research, and advise on the health needs of underserved populations. Ultimately, she strives to obtain her registered dietitian credential, specializing in maternal and child health nutrition to help promote equitable access to quality nutritional guidance for high-risk populations. We will also hear from Dr. Mousumi Bose, who is no stranger to many of us, the GFPD, and the rare disease community. Dr. Bose is the mother of Alon Betzer, who died from Zellweger spectrum disorder in 2011. Inspired by her personal experience, she shifted her career goals to focus on rare disease research. She has conducted research and published multiple papers on the role of the family caregiver in the management of rare pediatric disorders. Dr. Bose holds a faculty position at Montclair State University's Department of Nutrition and Food Studies, where she studies quality of life, patient-focused drug development, dietary assessments, and health equity in rare disease communities. Dr. Bose is passionate about learning what is important to rare disease families and using that information to improve their lives. Tonight, we also have Abby Pelster, licensed speech-language pathologist in Nebraska, and GFPD Community Engagement Coordinator. She'll be joining us during Q&A later to answer any questions that may arise about the GFPD patient registry. Abby's professional experience includes working with children of all ages in both public schools and pediatric clinics. She's also worked as a clinical supervisor and lecturer in the Department of Special Education and Communication Disorders at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. She developed a passion for educating the next generation of professionals while broadening her clinical experience to include the adult population. Her professional expertise, as well as her years of hands-on experience with individuals with peroxisomal disorders, give her great insight into communication needs in this patient population. Abby, Sarah, Dr. Bose, we are grateful to have you all here with us tonight. We're going to begin with a comprehensive presentation from Dr. Bose and Sarah Liz. We are going to welcome your questions throughout this entire webinar. Don't wait for them to, as soon as it pops in your head, please go ahead, use that Q&A feature or the chat feature, whichever one is easiest for you. As they arise, you can go ahead and put them in there, and we will get to them as soon as we get to that Q&A segment. And Dr. Bose, thank you again for being here. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Katie. Hi, guys. It's so nice to be here again. I can't see you, but I see that the participants on my bar here. So tonight, we're going to be talking about that third part of the EL-PFDD meeting. Talking about clinical trial participation and needs. I will share that Sarah, who's here presenting with me tonight, was a master's student who worked on analyzing a lot of the information that you guys provided during the EL-PFDD meeting. As Katie mentioned, she's currently doing a dietetic internship in New York City. But, in this particular instance, Sarah was really responsible for generating a lot of the data that we're going to be presenting tonight. So we're going to be tag teaming back and forth. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic to Sarah, and I'll come back in to discuss some of our findings. Give me 1 second. This always happens. There we go. I'm supposed to talk about the agenda, aren't I? Sorry, forgot about that part. All right, so before I hand the mic over to Sarah, I want to just give you an overview of the evening. So tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about what we are planning on sharing with you, and that's looking at these clinical trial perspectives from you guys that came from the EL-PFDD. Um, in that discussion, we're going to be talking about what you as a community shared in terms of what are your important considerations regarding clinical trial participation. What are the risks and the versus benefits that the peroxisomal disorder community in that EL-PFDD meeting would leverage in making these decisions regarding participating in clinical trial, and then talking a little bit about some of the logistical considerations. As Katie mentioned, the Voice of the Patient report is now live. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can get access to it if you haven't yet, and what we're going to do with this information to help move the needle forward and coming up and trying to drive forward new avenues of treatment for peroxisomal disorders. And then at the end, we'll take some questions, uh, whatever questions you have regarding this information that we're sharing with you tonight. So now I'm gonna hand it over to Sarah, who's gonna talk a little bit, and I'll come back when we're gonna share our findings. So there we go.
Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here today and share results from the clinical trials portion based on the insights you provided from the town hall meeting. Since the objectives were previously discussed in the last two webinars, I will briefly review this information as a refresher. Approximately a decade ago, the FDA observed that new treatments lacked representation of patients and their families. To address this discrepancy, the externally led patient-focused drug development initiative was created to include the experiences of families receiving treatment. Advocacy organizations like the GFPD are a way to collect and share patient and family voices and needs directly with the FDA. The primary goal of this initiative is to share your meaningful insights, lived experiences, and desired outcomes in the process of designing and evaluating new treatments. As patients and caregivers, you provide unique perspectives for clinical trial design. When these perspectives are shared, stakeholders can create treatments that are effective and meaningful for the peroxisomal disorder community. This is exactly what we accomplished in May 2024, which was to hear your stories and priorities and then report them to the FDA. The objectives of the EL-PFDD initiative was to describe the most frequent and impactful symptoms of peroxisomal disorders, characterize the impacts of symptoms, examine the effectiveness of existing treatments, and characterize the side effects of available treatments and therapies. We discussed our findings related to the first four objectives during the webinars that took place in March and in July. The other objective of this initiative, which we will focus on today, was to determine the desired clinical outcomes and clinical trial needs for families affected by peroxisomal disorder. For this, we recruited primary caregivers of living and deceased patients and adult patients who were able to represent themselves. Peroxisomal disorders diagnosis included were Zellweger spectrum disorder, deep bifunctional protein deficiency, ACOX deficiency, and AMACR deficiency. A brief refresher from the March webinar, presented by Dr. Bose and Pamela, shared results about symptoms and their impact in peroxisomal disorders. On average, patients reported having 11 to 12 symptoms at the same time, indicating how significant the overall burden is. The most frequently reported symptoms included low muscle tone, vision loss, hearing loss, and intellectual disability. Among these symptoms, vision loss was ranked as having the greatest impact, followed by mobility challenges and intellectual disability. Performing independent activities of daily living was the highest rated impact of symptoms. A full recording of the March webinar is also available on the GFPD website and YouTube channel for those who were unable to attend. Moving along, the July webinar presented by Dr. Bose and Nicole focused on the results of the effectiveness of current treatments available for peroxisomal disorders, as well as the side effects. On average, 13 to 14 treatments are administered at one time to manage symptoms. Treatments encompass at least 5 distinct treatment categories, including medications, physical devices, therapies/accommodations, supplementations, and medical interventions. The most frequently treated symptoms were mobility and sensory impairment. Additionally, several symptom categories, such as gastrointestinal symptoms, utilize a variety of treatments. It was found that the majority of treatments have limited effectiveness or lose effectiveness over time. Most treatments have considerable side effects, often worsening other symptoms. Overall, there is a need for new treatments for proximal disorders. In the previous webinars, this data collection information was presented by Pamela and Nicole. However, I will provide a brief recap to help familiarize you with the information we are presenting today. Ultimately, data were collected in 3 different phases. Pamela and Dr. Bose spearheaded the initial data collection, which included 4 focus groups and 2 interviews conducted via Zoom. Nicole, Pamela, and Dr. Bose developed the patient and caregiver survey in 2024, administered via an online survey platform. And after surveys were distributed, both focus groups and interviews, as well as survey responses, helped design the agenda for the town hall meeting, which many of you participated in. As many of you may recall, we collected valuable insights on specific topics from the conference, including proximal disorder symptoms and impacts, treatments, and lastly, clinical trials, which is what we'll be focusing on tonight. And because of the enormous amount of data we collected from your feedback, we'll be highlighting primarily just the survey and town hall meeting data in this presentation. And now we will discuss our data from the patient and caregiver survey related to survey questions about clinical trial participation. 2 surveys were developed based on the findings from the focus groups and interviews, in addition to regulatory guidance from the FDA. 33 survey questions for adult patients and 60 questions for caregivers of individuals with paroxysmal disorder were included. Overall, questions in the survey range from multiple choice, ranking, and Likert scale items. The majority of questions included for clinical trials were multiple choice or open-ended format. These are a few of our survey questions that are specific to clinical trials. As you can see, the first question simply asks if respondents would consider participating in a clinical trial of new treatments for paroxysmal disorders, followed by questions about important factors that influence respondents' decision to or to not enroll, and what respondents would want to improve in patients' daily lives. Respondents also reported on questions about participation in a placebo-controlled clinical trial, followed by willingness to tolerate certain symptoms in order to address urgent ones in a clinical trial, and willingness to tolerate severe or life-threatening risk in a clinical trial. In the caregiver and patient surveys, there were 53 caregivers representing 60 patients who completed the survey, as well as 2 adult patients. Once again, most represented patients were diagnosed with Zellweger spectrum disorder, and about 75% of represented patients were living at the time of data collection.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to take over from here. Hopefully I can. All right. So what I'm going to be sharing with you is our findings related to some of these questions that were asked during the survey, as well as sharing some of the feedback that we got from the town hall meeting. So as Sarah had mentioned, one of the questions that was one of the starting questions regarding clinical trials is, would you, if you are a patient or your child with a paroxysmal disorder, consider participation in a new clinical trial for a new treatment for paroxysmal disorders? And the vast majority of the respondents, so whether they were caregivers or patients on behalf of themselves, said that yes, they would, or perhaps depending on the factors. So out of all of the people that participated in this, that answered this survey question, only one respondent said that they would definitively not participate. So this is just just a starting point of just showing how our community is how willing our community is to participate in new clinical trials for new treatments for paroxysmal disorders. The next question that we asked was really asking, what are some of the important factors that you would need to take into consideration if you were thinking about enrolling in a clinical trial? And overall, the top factors that respondents were considering were, what are the goals and the outcomes of the study? Meaning, what do we expect to change? What are the side effects? And there was a lot of discussion in the town hall meeting regarding that sort of, how these outcomes, those benefits, if you will, relate to the potential risks, like the side effects. There was also consideration of worsening of other symptoms in peroxisomal disorders, as well as the need for open and transparent communication with the research team that's conducting the trial, and as well as the point people that would be communicating with the participants in this clinical trial. So these were the important factors that you guys reported back, saying that these are the things that I want to take into consideration if I were given the option to potentially participate in a clinical trial. So, as I just showed, what are the outcomes of the study is a really important question to ask, for consideration in clinical trials. So the next question that was asked was, what are the outcomes that you would want to see if there were a clinical trial for a new treatment? And overwhelmingly, the what we saw is symptoms related to improving independent activity. And this could potentially be partially because of the fact that it was mostly caregivers that were responding to this. So, if the patient has more independent activity, that will automatically have a benefit and less burden, not just physical burden, but less emotional burden on the caregiver. However, there were adult patients that did participate, and they also indicated that they would like to see an increase in their own independent activity. So, um, the next set of questions was asking about study design, and asked first, one of the first questions was, were you, if would you consider participation in a clinical trial that was placebo controlled? And I didn't get a chance to put the whole question up because it just was taking up too much space. But Sarah had shown earlier that the question actually asked, would you consider participation in a placebo-controlled clinical trial if there was the opportunity to receive the actual treatment at a later time? And so overwhelmingly, we see that respondents said yes, they would consider participation if that were the case. And this is the data from the survey. And we asked some of these similar questions during the live polling of the town hall meeting, and we saw the exact same results, that overwhelmingly, if there were a placebo-controlled clinical trial, that the majority of the respondents that participated in both the live polling as well as the survey would still consider participating. So the next question asked about if there were a clinical trial that addressed the most urgent symptoms for a patient in that study design, would you be willing to tolerate certain symptoms, provided that it did address the most urgent symptoms? And again, the majority of the participants that answered this question said yes. And then we took it one step further and asked, okay, you would be willing to tolerate certain side effects. What if they were severe or life-threatening? So, the breakdown is a little bit more split down the middle here. But, this is a big ask, right? We're asking, would you be willing to take on this severe and life-threatening risk? And even then, a good portion of the people that responded said maybe, right? So this really gives another indication of how willing that we are as a peroxisomal disorder community to have these types of conversations and really, move forward towards new clinical trials. So this is our survey data, and this is what, we call quantitative data. I'm going to share some of the quotes from some quotes from the town hall meeting, as this sort of qualitative data that we collected from your guys' inputs. And, I want to just say that, we had, please remember, we had an 8-hour meeting, so I cannot comprehensively summarize all of the discussion that took place, but we did choose a few standout quotes among the clinical trial discussion. And in this just starting off, and you're going to find that I love getting quotes in addition to like quantitative data, because it really adds a nice richness to the feedback that we're getting from you guys as a community. and also add some nuances, which I'm going to be sharing with you in just a little bit. So here, this is just asking about clinical trial participation. Would you or wouldn't you? And this is, showing that families are willing to weigh out the benefits over the risks. Person who was speaking on behalf of a parent said, they, meaning the parent, they are willing to take that chance. They want to try anything for a better quality of life, not only for their son, but also for anyone and everyone affected and will be affected by this disorder. So really not just thinking at it from an individual perspective, but from a community perspective as well. When we were asking questions about specific things or specific outcomes that families would want to see improved if there were a new treatment, we got a lot of feedback, and I'm going to try to go through it relatively quickly. But we're going to have access to these slides. Obviously, all of this information is in the report, so you can look at it. Slow down and actually read some of these quotes because they're really amazing quotes. You guys really just gave so much amazing feedback during this meeting, starting with mobility, because there was a lot of discussion on improved mobility. And what I want to highlight here in these two quotes is not only did people share about what they wanted to see improve, but they really emphasize specific changes that they wanted to see. So the quote that you see here on the left is a caregiver saying that, right now my child can stand with support for about 15 minutes a day. And what I'd like to see them do is be able to to go up to 4 hours a day, 4 hours to 6 hours a day. So we're seeing measurable change requirements. So this is really important information for people that are designing clinical trials, because when we're designing clinical trials, we can rely on things like statistics to tell us what is significant change, but what really is a very real life way to look at this is what is meaningful change to your community. And this is the data that we're getting, is what is meaningful change. And to this person, meaningful change is going from 15 minutes of standing with support to 4 to 6 hours of standing with support. Notice that they say standing with support. So it's not, and you're going to see this throughout all of these quotes, they're not, we as a community are not asking for full restoration of function in a lot of these symptoms. We are asking for, some change that would be meaningful to us. And, a lot of times it still will rely on support, but that's still meaningful. And I think that's a really important point to take away. And I definitely highlighted that when we were writing this Voice of the Patient report. Again, talking about specific things that they would like to see in the comment on the right, you see a person saying, what would be meaningful change to me is having decreased falls, decreased injuries, and that would be an indication of improved mobility. Let's move on to vision. The person on the left is talking about peripheral vision, and then indicating that by, activities that aren't necessarily related to vision, but they are related to being more independent. So this just goes back and highlights the fact that, what we want to see is increased independence in our children, in ourselves, if we are patients. The quote on the right here says that, again, talking about similar to the quote on mobility, looking at it, the improved vision, it doesn't need to be perfect. But, if they still have to wear glasses, that's great. That's fine. So really just giving, reasonable sort of requirements in terms of what we as a community see as meaningful. Let's talk about gastrointestinal symptoms. If you look at the quote on the right, again, talking about like measurable and degree of change. So this person was talking about how their child was vomiting constantly after meals. And if they went from vomiting, I'm sorry, I know some of these topics are not very pretty, but if this person said that they went from vomiting 8, 9, 10 times a day to just once a day, that would be considered meaningful change. This is the information that, these regulatory stakeholders like the FDA are looking for, right? I've put in this GI symptoms, this comments on um, bleeding, because a lot of times the bleeding issues are related to liver function. So uh, a lot in terms of meaningful change, if you look at the quote on the bottom, somebody had said, the bleeding for a lot of our families, so those that are experiencing the bleeding issues, they're pretty severe and they're very all-consuming. So in this particular quote, they said that they were getting a blood transfusion once a month. And for them, meaningful change would be if they could get a blood transfusion every other month. So once again, being not saying that I want the blood transfusions to stop, but saying even if we could get it down, this would be something that's meaningful to me. All right. And um, caregivers also reported on being able on relating things like improved cognition with factors like communication. So if you see on the left here, there's a parent here saying, if I could hear my child say the words "I love you," that would be awesome. And that's, this is what is meaningful change to us, right? With respect to seizures, certainly there were discussions on what would be considered meaningful change in terms of the number of seizures, but the more common thread that we heard during that discussion is not just effective seizure treatment, but also making sure that if you got seizures under control, that making sure that it did not have adverse effects on being alert or breathing, which were a lot of these common side effects with current seizure treatments. So we know that leukodystrophy, which is often characterized by the progression of the disease, is very, very difficult to treat. But caregivers indicated that even just slowing down that progression, at least to the point where you can intervene and try to treat what's happening at that moment, that would be considered meaningful change. And we had a one parent who explicitly said regarding respiratory function that if their child was on oxygen half of the time that they were on, then that would be meaningful to them. So once again, indicating that a full restoration of function is not required in order for in order for a change to be considered meaningful. So that's a little bit about outcomes. And talking about what is the definition of meaningful change. I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about study design and other logistical considerations. So these are some thoughts on placebo-controlled trials, and multiple families indicated willingness to participate in placebo-controlled clinical trials, especially if there were an opportunity to get the actual treatment later down the road. It should be noted that there were some families that did express concerns about being in a placebo-controlled clinical trial, or actually clinical trials at all. If you look at the quote on the right, this particular caregiver mentioned the challenge of participating in clinical trials, especially if there was a medication that they were given during the clinical trial that worked, but then once the clinical trial was over, not being able to have access to that medication because it hadn't been FDA approved yet. And this is a total valid concern. I will say, I'm going to let this sort of segue into something I'm going to hit upon down the line. This is why these quotes are just really great, because it gives you such, robust, rich data. What we found in a lot of our qualitative data, like in these quotes, is that the majority of the comments that expressed reservations regarding clinical trial participation during the town hall meeting, they generally came from either caregivers of adult patients, like you see here, or adult patients themselves. And I'm going to touch upon that in just a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about this risk versus benefit concept. So here on the left, you see a quote where a parent is saying, and this is kind of going back to that question, is if it's addressing the most urgent need, would you be willing to put up with side effects? And this person, in their experience, the liver disease was the most urgent issue. So if there were a clinical trial focusing on liver disease, then they would be willing to put up with a lot more side effects. But if it were something else, like in this case, hearing loss, then they might be less willing to participate in that clinical trial. Going back to the point in the survey where the survey question where we were asking about what are the important factors to consider. One of the top factors was open and transparent communication with the clinical research team. And so this is what the quote that you see on the right is really getting at, is making sure that, one of the biggest sort of factors in making these decisions is feeling like you have all the information that you need to make that decision, as well as, deal with any sort of bumps along the way when you do agree to participate in a clinical trial. So in this case, this parent is talking about, okay, I need to know what the side effects are, and not just what the side effects are, but what are you going to do once, if my child is experiencing that side effect, what can we do either at the clinic site or what can we do at home? So that was something that was important to this parent. And once again, speaking on that point about communication, this parent very explicitly said there needs to be a standardized process in providing that communication so that, if there is something that's some sort of adverse effect that's happening, do we know when can we get enough information to know that we're not doing any irreparable damage? Do we know that there is the possibility of a risk of irreparable damage? If there is, then that information is going to be really important to know when you are making that decision to participate. So, all extremely important and valid conversations that need to happen between the clinical research team as well as the you guys, the community that's participating in that clinical trial. So, again, touching upon risks versus benefits, um, what we saw pretty consistently is that, given, our circumstances, having very few treatment options, overall, the community as a whole was willing to take on a decent amount of risk, if it allowed for benefits that outweighed those risks. And again, in some cases, people were willing to put up with potentially life-threatening risks if that benefit was worth it. And a lot of, overall, the consensus was that, it is in most cases, it's probably worth it. Now, that being said, I want to share the perspective of an adult who participated in the meeting. And, I'm not going to go through this whole quote, but basically in this quote, this patient is saying that a couple of things is that, they have developed certain, being an adult, they've developed certain strategies to cope and do, what they need to get to, live their best life. But if there were a clinical trial and there were a significant amount of risk that would sort of disrupt whatever sort of systems they had in place to live their best life, then they may not consider participating. And this is sort of the overall sentiment that we found in in caregivers of adult patients, as well as in the adult patients themselves. I will say, going back to like trying, finding this out in the qualitative data in these quotes, we did go back to the survey data and tried to separate out, who are respondents that are representing young patients and who are respondents representing adult patients. When we made the cutoff at 18 and above, we actually didn't see that much of a difference in terms of willingness to participate in clinical trials, but we are seeing it here in these comments, in these quotes. So I just wanted to just address that. And if we want to have a discussion about that, we can certainly discuss that here or offline. Some other logistical considerations. some people said that, if there were different ways to administer treatments, that would increase their chances of considering participation. This quote that you see on the right is talking about some of the pains that families have to take when traveling, especially when they have a child with very complex medical needs. And then the next quote that I'm going to share also is talking a little bit about the logistics of traveling. Talk in this particular case, talking about having to take off of work, having to figure out, how to manage school. So there was a lot of conversation, although I haven't included an explicit quote here about options for remote data collection when possible. Obviously, we can't collect all data remotely, but if there are options to lessen the amount of time to travel to a clinical trial site, then that would definitely be something that would be worth considering in terms of participating in clinical trials. So I'm going to sort of close up here because I've been talking for a while, and I'm going to sort of segue into just kind of like overall what we've gotten from all of these 3 webinars that you guys have you know, sat through. So first, let's talk about clinical trial participation. Just summarizing what I've shared here in this data. Overall, we find that patients and families are open to participating in clinical trials that are testing for new treatments for peroxisomal disorders. And this is even if even if they are part of a placebo group with the option to get a treatment later on. And a lot of these decisions really came down to what is the risk versus benefit. But overall, families said that they would be willing, if the benefit were worth it, and most of the times it is, if the outcomes were worth it, then they would be willing to take on a significant amount of risk. In the qualitative data, we found that families of younger patients were generally more open to clinical trial participation than older patients and their families. The major factors affecting making those decisions included what do you expect to improve or change? What are the side effects? Making sure there's open and transparent communication from that clinical trial research team, and making accommodations so that maybe in some cases there are either satellite data collection or remote data collection. In terms of outcomes that families wanted to see improved if there were a new clinical trial, a lot of it really fell on independent activity. So symptoms related to independent activity, and this was vision, mobility, cognition, all of these things allowed for more independent activity. What that one mother who had talked about being on less oxygen was really, that particular conversation was about allowing their child to be more independent and not being hooked up to a tank or a concentrator all day. In terms of outcomes related to seizures, the overarching sort of feeling was that yes, they want seizure control, obviously, but they want seizure control with less side effects on engagement as well as overall respiration. Some of the things and I didn't hit upon this directly in this data, but this was a common thread, is that another sort of outcome that would be considered meaningful is the delayed onset of new symptoms. And that's difficult to see from, within one person, but when you're looking at a large group, this may be a potentially meaningful outcome. All right, so that's all I'm going to say regarding clinical trials. I'm going to sort of segue into sort of closing out and talking about the report because it is live and this is exciting, and we want to share this with you guys. So overall, what we found in the EL-PFDD meeting with all of your guys's amazing input, it was, I still reflect back at that meeting, and I was just blown away with how just amazing everybody was participating and sharing their experiences with the FDA. This is not easy. You guys did an amazing thing here. And all of my conversations with the FDA since then, everybody were just talking about, I was just blown away in this meeting. I think many members of the FDA share that they cried during the meeting because you guys just told some really poignant stories. But in those stories, this is what we've gathered from it. We know that the symptom burden of peroxisomal disorder is really far-reaching, and it has a significant impact on our daily lives, not just for the patients, but for the families. And this, like I said, huge impact on our quality of life. We know that there are no treatments, or very few treatments that are specific for peroxisomal disorders. So this results in the treatment of many different symptoms. And most of these symptoms, they either don't work, or they're inconsistently effective, or they lose effectiveness over time. A lot of these treatments have a lot of side effects, and sometimes will make other symptoms worse. And tonight, what we saw is that the families really shared very useful information on what they want to see improved, not just what outcomes they want to see, but the degree of improvement. And that's really important information to share. And with that, it was um, shown that the amount of improvement that we are asking for in with a new treatment is not anything that's extremely like lofty. We Incremental improvement is still meaningful improvement, and I think that's also really important to share. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening now. So you may have gotten the notification in your email that the Voice of the Patient report has been published to the GFPD website. Here is the QR code if you don't have access to it, but if you go directly to the GFPD website, you should be able to also find it. So there's a lot of ways to access this report. It's surprisingly, considering how much input we got, it's not as long as I thought it was going to be. So I'm really grateful to all of my co-authors, including Sarah, including Katie, including Ryan, in really helping to make this report, as great of a document as it was, as it is. Once it was published to the GFPD website, I immediately reached out to our point people at the FDA, and we shared it with them. They were happy to receive it, and this will be published to the FDA website. It's just that, I mean, there's a shutdown apparently, and so some of this work that's happening at the level of the FDA, it may take a little bit of time. They told us about 6 months. So you can, again, you can read the report, and once it's available on the FDA website, I will be definitely letting our families know on the parent page. And so what I would love to sort of have a conversation about now is talking a little bit about what do we do with this information. And one of the things I think, there is a lot of talk about, okay, we've got this, what now? Okay. And in some instances, it may be like, well, we wait to see when there are new treatments available, and now we've got this blueprint so that when clinical trials are designed, they can take this report into consideration. But there's a lot less passive things that we could be doing with this report. And one of the things that we could do really, really seamlessly is integrate the findings of this report into the development of our current patient registry. So I have this here. And Abby, do you want to speak to this, or should I?
I'm happy to talk about it. Thanks.
Okay.
So my name is Abby Pelster, and as Katie mentioned at the beginning, I am the principal investigator for the GFPD patient registry for peroxisomal disorders. And so this is an exciting opportunity, again, for our community to participate in research for the GFPD. Currently, there are 5 surveys with the patient registry: demographics, diagnosis, medical history, treatment, and a quality of life survey, depending on if you're a caregiver, a patient yourself. And so we are just, always looking for more people to join our patient registry. While these are our current surveys, the unique thing about the patient registry is we can customize and tailor surveys that we as the GFPD deem appropriate. And so, partnering with Dr. Bose and with Sarah on some of these results, as a speech language pathologist, I'm going to be a little biased and always think about communication, but that maybe isn't the top priority of our community. And so we can customize additional surveys and get those out to our registry community to gather data to help drive industry research in additional treatment options. And so that's how you can access the registry. And we would, love any questions you have and love, your participation if you haven't had a chance to start one yet.
Thank you so much, Abby. So I'm gonna be drawing this to a close. I don't get a lot of time. I haven't gotten a lot of time in these webinars to really fully do acknowledgments, but since this is one of the last webinars that we're going to be doing, I just want to just take a second to just say thank you to this was not, this was not done in a silo. There was a lot of people that were involved in the development of this report, the analysis of this data. I had an amazing team at my university at Montclair State, including Sarah, including Pamela, including Nicole, as well as I had 2 high school students. I had other graduate students, Ariel and Natalie. We had a lot of our faculty at Montclair State serve as thesis committee members for Sarah, Nicole, and Pamela. We have our medical and scientific advisory board. I want to mention our funders, the Wynne Matafee Research Foundation, and Miriam, our regulatory stakeholders, and certainly our leadership at the GFPD. So I just want to take a second to acknowledge them and really say thank you to you guys as well for participating in this effort. I feel super proud of this report. I hope that you guys feel that it adequately reflects, our overall community experience. So at this point, I'll just go ahead and switch over to questions. And Katie, I'm gonna take the slide back to the first one, if that's okay. So my my big picture isn't like sitting here, if that's all right with you.
I'm not sure where you're moving to, but
I'm going to the back to the front, if that's okay.
no, if you could move it back to questions, that would be great.
All right, all right.
Mousumi does not like her picture up, but we're going to show all of your beautiful faces so everyone knows who they're talking to. And that also will show that we have Abby Pelster with us as well. But first, I want to just thank you and Sarah for this great presentation. As you just shared, we're going to move into the Q&A portion of this webinar tonight. And yes, Abby Pelster is with us. She serves as the principal investigator for the GFPD patient registry for peroxisomal disorders. And she's here to answer any questions that you may have, since hopefully everyone's starting to connect how much this really is all going to come together, and really help develop hopefully treatments in the near future. Both Ryan Maple, the GFPD's executive director, and I are co-investigators of the registry, and we're both here as well. So I think you have a great crew tonight that's able to really answer a variety of topics. This is just a really great opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. We've had a few come in. I know I appreciate everyone, when you think of them, going ahead and submitting them. So I want to remind everyone, if you have any right now that you're just thinking of, you can do that in the chat, or you can do that in the Q&A button down in below the webinar player window. And we do have one question that I think probably a lot of the parents feel a little bit relatable, and that's that, we learned a lot about the overall impacts of symptoms and peroxisomal disorders from these webinars, and a lot of this we already know. So that first part, when I saw that, I thought, yep, that's relatable. But what their question is, are there any new findings or insights that we learned from the meeting?
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna let Sarah take this because again, a lot of this was, a lot of this data was analyzed by my master's students. So, Sarah, do you wanna share some of the things that you found out?
Of course. So we did not gather information about new symptoms. However, there were many details about various symptoms and their interrelationships. For example, although many families may know this from experience, not all are aware of how liver dysfunction causes varices with bleeding issues. And I previously described these details in my thesis. And if anyone would like to see the slides connecting this information, I'd be happy to share them. So in a healthy liver, blood flows from the portal vein, bringing blood from the gastrointestinal tract, kind of like a sponge soaking in water spraying from a hose. Now, if you replace that sponge connected to the hose with a rock, the water flow from the hose is disrupted, causing pressure to build in the hose. This happens when the liver is damaged, like in cirrhosis, where extensive scarring can turn the liver from a spongy tissue to becoming hard like a rock. And when there is an obstruction of portal blood flow to the liver, because it's now not soaking in any blood, but letting it build up in that portal vein, it causes portal hypertension. And portal hypertension can lead to the development of varices, where that built up blood reroutes into smaller vessels that are not designed for large volumes of blood, causing blood vessels to rupture, which can potentially be fatal. Caregivers from the conference noted that liver dysfunctions and peroxisomal disorders were associated with portal hypertension, variceal bleeding, and frequent hospitalizations. And given the liver's crucial role in the severity of progressive liver dysfunction and the frequency of hospital visits were often reported as clinical trial outcome priorities based on the feedback we gathered from the conference.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I've actually had the privilege of hearing you share that and your slides. And I think it's just such a great way to bring it down and help everyone understand some of that. If anyone in the audience that's listening wants to see her slides that she just offered, please reach out to the GFPD. We'd be happy to connect you with Sarah so that she can share that with you.
Perhaps we could take, I remember during Sarah's thesis defense, she had a lot of really nice visuals. So maybe
Hmm.
that's something that we can put onto the GFPD website. I feel like I learned a lot more about liver disease with Sarah's thesis defense. And I think what she did, taking these feedback from families and then just sort of putting all of this stuff together, I'm hoping will be nice informational guides for like newly diagnosed families as well as families that are still looking to learn about the disease.
I agree. I think that's a great suggestion. And we also have a question referencing back to something I believe you said during your presentation. Did you say it would take 6 months before the FDA is able to do anything with this information?
So they said up to 6 months. And it's not the action item here is simply just putting it on their website. So for it to be publicly available on the FDA website, they said it's gonna, I think they said 4 to 6 months was the average time, but they said they assured me that it will be up. But again, I think what the FDA really expects us to do is to proactively promote on our end. So it's great that it's on the FDA, that it'll be on the FDA site, and I'll be excited to see it up there. But I think what's probably more important is what do we as a community do with this report? And Katie, I know that you and I have had lots of conversations of things that we can do with all of this information,
So
including
much.
the patient
Yes.
registry, right? So I feel like, and I'm gonna share with you some things that we found out when we were doing, sort of background research for all of these students' master's thesis projects, is that, we were looking at, what was the evidence out there that looked at, how these voice of the patient reports translated into new treatments for rare diseases. And I'll be perfectly frank with you, there's not a lot of information out there on how these EL-PFDDs, these voice of the patient reports, has directly translated into a lot of new treatments. but I think what that says to us as a community is that we need to not be passive in just having this done and then just be wait like as a wait and see. We need to be proactive. We need to be engaged. We need to, be actively involved in research and make sure everybody knows that this is our experience because the more we share these experiences, the better designed new treatments and new clinical trials for these new treatments will be. Does that make sense?
It does. And I have some great comments too. Just, I know I don't want you to miss it. In the chat, you guys did an incredible job with this report. Thank you. I think there's a lot of agreement with things you're saying. I have a few other great questions that have come in, but I am going to go to one that just came in because I don't want to get too far off topic. This one's going to go back to the liver again, since Sarah just talked about that. So is it fair to say that if we help liver function, we can make a big difference in our overall warriors?
I think that's a really good question. And I feel like, the way that I would start by answering this is that probably for some. We got to remember that this is a very clinically heterogeneous disease, right? And even, the if we were so the degree of improved liver function may have huge impacts on certain patients. We've talked to some of these patients that like the ones that have like transfusions, every month. Yeah, probably that would help them. For somebody that does not have that, I think the degree of improvement that we would see with improved liver function may not be quite as dramatic. So I think, yes, sure, I think that it could have improvement, but the degree of change or the degree of improvement that we would see would probably vary patient to patient.
Thanks so much for taking the time to answer that. I know that's a challenging question, but so important and definitely something that we all think about so frequently is how can we help our warriors? So thank you for that. We have quite a few questions. I'm going to shift gear a little bit and have Abby, if you could share about the registry on this one. Do we need to submit any paperwork for the registry?
Oh, that's a great question. No, at this time, we are not asking for any diagnostic reports, any test results, anything to be uploaded as part of the registry. So all of the questions will just be answered by the individual completing the registry. So whether that is the participant themselves, an individual, an adult with a peroxisomal disorder, a caregiver. So you're filling out one on behalf of, possibly a child. We're also asking that anyone that has lost someone, if someone has died of a peroxisomal disorder, we also are asking to collect data. There's an option for you to do the registry as well. So we can just get as much data as possible. But right now it's just all questions answered by you.
Great, thanks. And we also, since you're talking about, it's not that difficult, you don't have to worry about getting things scanned, you don't have to worry about requesting records. If somebody is not tech savvy and they're just really confused, I've had that question more than once come in tonight about, just a little bit of confusion about how do we get started on this and how do we get assistance?
Yes. And so we at the GFPD are really proud that we are one of the first, we actually were the first organization to offer completion of the registry via interview if you have accessibility issues. So if you are limited in your access to technology or internet access, if it's difficult for, our warriors often, have a sensory loss, via whether it be vision or some other option. So we do have the option of completing them via interview for people who have difficulty accessing the registry independently. One kind of caveat to that, just because we want to collect the best data possible, is if we start the registry via email, or via interview, we really want to complete all of the surveys via email. We want to be as consistent as possible in our data collection. So if a new survey were to come out, as the Voice of the Patient report is now available, and you did the other surveys via interview, we would want to continue in that way and not flip-flop back and forth. But you absolutely can contact us at the patient registry at the gfpd.org, and we will be happy to support you through any piece of the registry.
Thanks so much. And that's also a great piece of information for people to know that we can continue to help you. I think if anything, it's, yes, we have to stick with the same method, but that just shows that we're here for you. It's not a one-time thing. You're not going to get on with Abby and do an interview and she's going to go away, after that first survey. She's going to continue to be here to help you through this process. I'm going to shift back over to, a question that I think most of me, this might be best for you. But anybody obviously on the panel, Sarah, if you feel like you want to jump in, or Abby, how can we contribute to the development of clinical trials? Is there a way to help us draw attention toward developing potential new treatments?
So, I'll start by saying, we've already started this process, right? Just simply, in terms of, how do we contribute to new clinical trials? Simply participating in the EL-PFDD meeting has taken us one step further, and I think that's great. So, we should all be, we should all be proud of ourselves that we participated in this. It's not the end, obviously. There's still a lot of work to be done. And I think the best way to move, the needle towards new clinical trials is really just better understanding the disease, right? And nobody has the insights that we do as families affected by this disorder. And so sharing our stories is really, really important. And we have the ability to do that through the McGill Natural History Study. We have the ability to do that through this patient registry that Abby has been talking about. The patient registry, in addition to, the information that it's collecting about, you or your loved one, it also has the ability to be a contact registry where you can be notified about new clinical trials. So that's another reason that you really want to join this registry, right? I think, again, any opportunity that you have to share your story with some of these key stakeholders, our MSA, our physicians, our researchers, when there are clinical trials, or even in participating in the natural history study, even if you're not giving even beyond giving formal data, talking to some of these, the PIs of these studies, and talking about anything and everything that you or your child is going through, all of is really important. Staying actively engaged in what's going on in research, is really the sort of best way to do this. And I'm going to take this moment to sort of, just soapbox for a second, if you will. I do want to say that, in learning all this information, especially, learning that, like, not learning, we know this, right? We live this, that, that current treatments, it's not enough. There is a need for new treatments, and therefore there is a need for new clinical trials. And there's a lot of stuff that we can do to advocate for this. What we shouldn't be doing, guys, is really is making sure that we're not going rogue and, looking, taking to, I don't know, like social media or whatever, like looking at TikTok. There's a lot of false and inaccurate information out there on, different supplements and things like that. I'm not saying don't take supplements. I'm saying go, make sure that, you are doing your due diligence. You are going into sort of this in the most informed manner, because, going back to this point on clinical trials, a lot of times if you are taking things on your own, it may be an exclusion criteria and disqualify you from participating in actual clinical trials. So make sure that whatever sort of decisions that you are making in terms of the managed care, that you are, going to, legit sources, going to, sources that have been vetted by organizations like the GFPD. And once again, just staying actively involved and being active, engaged patient and family collaborators in research. Is there anything else you think I can add to that, Katie?
No,
I'm
I think that was great. I think Abby might be able to. I was actually thinking maybe the same thing about the, consent for
Mhm.
additional research. Do you want to share about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to elaborate a little bit. So, as part of the consent process for the patient registry, there's actually an option for you to opt in to be notified of additional research opportunities. And these will be, we as the GFPD and as the GFPD patient registry are not going to send you questionable studies to participate in. So we will be doing our due diligence to make sure that, research opportunities that we're sharing with the registry community are of quality. Um, and so I do think that that is just another avenue. One other thing I want to point out, because I think this gets confused a lot, different organizations might use the words natural history study and registry interchangeably to mean the same thing. We have two different ones. So the GFPD patient registry and the natural history study are two separate projects. And so some people have, maybe said, "Oh, I did this one." And I'm like, "Actually, this is something separate." And so just to make sure we're clear on everything too, but this would be a great way to stay informed as well.
Yes, and I think there's a mix up with the family directory too, so I'm really glad you drew attention to that. I appreciate that. And I did put, for anybody that may need it, it's in the chat. I did put the patient registry at the gfpd.org if you have any questions about the registry. I also dropped a link because Dr. Bose was just talking about, supplements being safe and really making sure that you're empowered with knowledge and you're making informed decisions. And so a while back, the GFPD did have a blog post about exactly that topic. So I went ahead and dropped that in the chat as well, just to help empower everyone to make sure they're making informed decisions. We have run a little over, but I think it's been such great discussion. I just want to give a moment to ask the panelists if they wanted to add anything else. We had some questions that went unanswered, and I will always follow up with everyone to make sure that you get your answers. But this has just been really great. Dr. Bose, Abby Pelster, Sarah Liz, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I just want to say thank you to everybody that was here tonight and listened. Hopefully, this was something that was informative to you. And again, thank you to all of the folks that participated in the EL-PFDD meeting. Like this report really, I think I said this in the family post. It kind of wrote itself because you guys gave such amazing information. And I'm just again, it's this report. And the impact that I hope that it will have, especially in conjunction with the GFPD patient registry. I'm really excited to see what happens. So thank you.
I think we all share that enthusiasm. We're all grateful for the work that you do, the presentation tonight, all of you being here, taking the time, just your insight and care that you brought to tonight's conversation. To our audience, thank you for being here and for your thoughtful participation as well. Your questions were fantastic. Before I wrap up, I do have a few quick reminders. So please just stay for one more moment. And if you could shift to the next slide. And I agree. We really hope tonight's discussion inspires that continued collaboration, advocacy, and research to make a difference for the individuals and families who are affected by these peroxisomal disorders. If you missed part 1 or 2 of this webinar series, don't worry, both recordings are available. That was actually a question that came in during the presentation, so I want to make sure everyone knows that both of those are available. You can go to our website. You can go to the GFPD YouTube channel, but you can also go to the GFPD website and under the research tab, you can just select the EL-PFDD meeting from the drop-down menu, and there you will find the Voice of the Patient report, one-pagers containing key findings from these webinars, and just so much more. Tonight's session will also be posted there as well. To stay connected, be sure that you are receiving the GFPD Top 3 newsletter and following us on social media. If you're not already subscribed, there's a QR code right now on the screen that you can scan, and you can just submit very quickly your information, and that will help you get signed up, and we'll make sure that you are getting those bi-weekly updates. Also, stay tuned for a webinar after the new year in January that's going to be focused on the Voice of Patient report and the GFPD registry for peroxisomal disorders. A big thank you to Miriam for sponsoring this webinar and helping make these important conversations and learning opportunities available for our global community. And finally, please be on the lookout for a short post-webinar survey, and please take a moment to complete it. Your feedback is very important to us. Thank you again to all of you for being with us, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.